Good morning, Wabash. Speaking today at Pioneer Chapel is Dr. Richard Warner with his talk titled Kitchen, Wit and Wisdom. Dr. Warner teaches courses in Latin American, African, and world history. His research is focused on the indigenous history of Mexico, Latin American religious history, and more recently, the global history of food. Prior to becoming a professor, Dr. Warner worked as a professional chef for a decade in California. In his free time, Dr. Warner loves to cook and is an avid organic gardener, working his plot at home across the street from the college. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Warner.
Thank you, and thank you for coming out, given that you didn't know until like an hour ago that was going to be me. I didn't know until a day and a half ago. It's a regular refrain. Times have been tough. We've had a difficult time. We need to take care of each other. Most of our public talks have been about that, and that's the important thing. And I just thought maybe it's time to have a little bit of fun here, right? Yeah, right? So, yeah. What happens the second Saturday of November? Yeah, we get the bell back. All right. So that was an ad lib. Actually, the whole thing is ad lib because I just got it on one sheet of paper. We do need to continue to take care of each other. I invite you to come by my office. Except for Thursday and Friday afternoons, I'm usually around. I've got cake muffins. I'm going to give you one. I want to talk about how you're feeling. If you want to steal one, that's fine. But I'm continuing to do that. I realize they're not quite as yummy as the donuts, but they're all right. So come on by for a cake muffin, right? So I'm a little nostalgic being here. For a week ago, I did something that in 23 years I have not done before. I actually participated a little bit in chapel sing. And I'm wearing my whites because of my subject today, but I almost wore this, and I thought I'd bring it to you just to show it off one last time. There it is, yeah. I was with Dr. Melissa Butler, who was staying with me. She came for homecoming, and I was with her, and I went back to see her afterwards, and she said, "I thought you knew the song." And I said, because it used to be before they would paint a W if you didn't know the song, and now actually it's a positive W. So yeah, yes, Melissa, I know the song. So I'm going to talk about kitchen culture and what I've learned about kitchen culture and big life lessons and little life lessons from being in the kitchen. You can learn a lot about kitchen culture from certain things, certain movies and books. My favorite movie, and my students know this, about kitchens is Ratatouille. Right. Now, I realize it's a cartoon, but honestly, Ratatouille captures the way kitchens move, the way people move around. Like even today, like in my house, people wait for, or I will wait for somebody to go by the stove before somebody else does, right? There's different ways that you move, right? So it's definitely got it. It's got some of the politics of the kitchen also, which is mostly what I'm going to talk about today. If you see, who's seen the movie Waiting by any chance? Anybody? Very few have. So it's a little on the R-rated side, but it's also really accurate about how things are in the back of the house versus the front of the house, right? In the front of the house, everything is like a veneer, right? Everybody's smiling and happy. And in the back of the house, every fourth word is the F word. There's a lot of activity going on. It's a very different kind of environment, right? So that movie is really good, and I highly recommend the book by Anthony Bourdain, may he rest in peace. Kitchen Confidential is his first book. I actually, some of you have read it because it's been in my tutorial, and it really explains this sort of warp and woof of the industry. So what are chefs like? All right, well, you've seen them on TV. One thing about chefs is that they're not boring. I've never been a boring chef, right? Seriously, they're not boring. Are they a-holes? Yeah, a lot of them. A lot of them are not very nice people. I mean, it really is true, right? You see, you see that a lot on TV with they're yelling at people or whatever, right? Yeah, those are the people that I tended to work with. I don't think I was like that very much, but who knows? Ask the people I worked with. Maybe I was. It's a very hard industry. Okay, you work really hard. Lots of hours, you're on your feet a lot, you're sweaty, people are yelling at you, there's a lot of, one thing goes wrong and all of life falls apart for a little while. So what we tend to do a lot is drink. And so if you were my last chapter top, you know I don't do that anymore. But I did plenty of that when I was in the restaurant business, right? So beware of that if you happen to go down that line. But it's a party crazy place, right? So I mean, I remember cooking brunch, and I'd have like a bottle of champagne going at 9 o'clock in the morning, and that's the culture that it is. So it's pretty whacked. But there's a lot of good things that I did learn there, right? So one of the things that I learned is, and I continue to learn, it's a liberal arts lesson, I think. There's a difference between wisdom and knowledge, right? So if you're in a good school, yeah, maybe you go on and get further degrees, you're getting lots of knowledge and information, that's one thing. But having wisdom is a different matter, okay? And that's something that doesn't come out of a book, and I don't even know how it comes. But it certainly comes through life experience. And so I've learned wisdom from people with far less education than I've had, far less education than I've had, right? I learned a lot of wisdom in the kitchen, right? So the principal thing I learned a lot about was the life of working people, right? A lot of people that do what I do for a living, you know, have good schooling and they go through and they get a PhD. They haven't really worked much with their hands out in the world, right? And one of the impacts of that is that they may not completely understand what it's like to be a working person, right? They might like working people, but they don't have the wisdom of a working person, right? It has not been shared with them, right? And I really feel blessed that this is my second career. I was a chef for 11 years. I learned a lot about being a working person and working with people who were further down the peg than I was, that I learned a lot from, who I'll be talking about, right? So I'll talk a little bit about some of the places I worked. So growing up in Vermont when I was in college, I started working in a vegetarian kind of hippie restaurant called the Fresh Ground Coffee House, which, like every other place I work, is no longer in business. Not my fault, it's just a restaurant business. But it was a cool place, you know. I served some famous people there. You probably don't know who Pete Seeger was, but you might heard of Art Garfunkel. You know, it was kind of a fun place. And I was just, you know, cutting my teeth learning about the business there, right? And how it was different. To tell you the truth, sometimes I would spend more time in the restaurant than I would in my schoolwork, because I think I was starting to understand that it was more important to me. So I was a really crappy student the first time, I'm not going to lie to you. Then I came back and I was a good student. So I understand if you're distracted by something, that's life. But so then I moved to San Francisco. I went to culinary school in San Francisco for a little while. I got kind of bored with that because I'd already been working in a while in the industry and I didn't think I was learning anything, but I learned a few things in culinary school. I worked in a place called Chez Jean, French restaurant in Presidio Heights in San Francisco. That's a very upscale restaurant in a city which is very upscale, so everybody who went there was upscale. So I don't know if you ever heard of James Beard, but I cooked for James Beard when I was there. He's an old chef from years back. But I learned there was a sous chef there. So a sous chef is the second in command of the kitchen, right? So the sous chef here is Liesel, right? The head chef is Jason, is the big guy, and the sous chef is Liesel, right? So sous chef is a very important job. It's arguably they work harder than the chef, and they have to answer for the things that the chefs don't do and stuff. It's a very kind of interesting position in the kitchen. But I learned from this sous chef who was named David, a very crazy guy from New York. The one thing I take away from him is the notion of food sense. It's a food sense. And so what that is an easy way to explain it. And the students that have cooked with me know, you know, when I'm cooking, I'll taste it, honestly, with my finger usually. And I go, that needs some more curry, you know, or more salt. I usually don't think it needs more salt. That needs more something, right? That's a sense that I've been able to develop over time about food, right? And it comes out better because then I know how things might go well together because I've been cooking for a long time, right? Food sense is wisdom, right? That's something. And I was pretty early on in my career when I learned that from that guy. It's not something you can look up in a book. Books are great, right? But I will say to you that food sense is really important when you're cooking, and it's not as important when you're baking. So baking is a science, man. You can't in fact, I just made some cake muffins yesterday. I was trying to invent a new recipe, and I got to tell you, they're not that good because they're very chocolatey, but they're not, the raspberry didn't come through very well. Because you can't do that with baking, right? You got to follow the orders, right? So cooking and baking are two different kind of skills. Cooking has got a different sort of wisdom. I work with a lot of guys, so one of the biggest things that happened to me in the restaurant business living in California, I work with a lot of guys who are from Mexico. They're undocumented immigrants from Mexico in the 1980s, right? And Anthony Bourdain also worked with a lot of Ecuadorian immigrants in New York. He writes about that. I learned a lot of stuff from these guys, a lot of stuff, right? Stuff that you couldn't put in a book, although maybe someday I will. Just little pearls of wisdom. Like there was this one place I worked at on the wharf in Santa Cruz, California called Malios, also not in business anymore. There was a guy named, I don't even remember his name actually. I don't remember his name, but he was a garde manger. I mean, he was working with salads, right? Kind of below the totem pole, and I was the line chef, a little bit up on the totem pole, and he wanted a Coca-Cola, right? Because in the kitchen you want something to drink, and the restaurant was going to charge him $1 for the Coca-Cola. Here he is working in the kitchen. I was like livid, I mean, all my, I grew up, if you don't know, knowing Bernie Sanders, and my father was a very active, working class kind of politico. So like anti-worker stuff really triggers me, right? And I'm going, the brother just wants a Coke, man. It costs you like 9 cents or something, right? You're going to charge him $1. Yeah, okay. And so I'm really getting upset, and the guy goes, "No problem, senor. I drink milk." And then I thought, that's freaking brilliant, right? Because the milk is probably costing him 50 cents, right? But the milk is in the kitchen, right? So he's kind of like, it's one of these, right? But with sotto suave, he's not getting upset or anything. It's so great to be able to get even without getting upset. Well, what a great lesson, life lesson, right? I'll never forget that guy, although obviously I've forgotten his name. I worked for a lot of years down by the beach in Santa Cruz in a place called Casablanca Restaurant. Well, of course, it's still not there. But Casablanca Restaurant, where I work with lots of guys, and I worked there, oh golly, I must have worked there like 5 or 6 years, and I ended up becoming head chef, and that was a really great experience. Good restaurant, I cook for some famous people there, Clint Eastwood, Andy Griffith, because they lived in the area. It was fun. Again, so front of the house, the waiters, very expensive restaurant. All men, because the female owner wanted all men in the front because it was classier, she thought. Making, twice as much money as I was. They're in the wait station snorting Coke, and we're in the back drinking beer, right? So again, class analysis, I'm figuring that out a little bit. Coke used to be very expensive, by the way. That's the class analysis. And I'd be back in the back, and the shift would start in the restaurant in the day, and I'd turn to my Mexican brothers and I'd go, "Amigo, vas por 24, go for 24." So you go down to the corner and get a case of beer. We'd put it on the line, and it was like camaraderie, right? It was a fraternity. I know you guys can probably relate to that, right? It was a very closely knit relationship. We have what we call the Brigade System. So we get really busy, right? And I got to cut up some more meat because I don't have enough steaks cut, and we call it in the weeds, right? When you're really busy, you got all these tickets up, and the waiters are screaming for the food. Amigo, come help me cut some meat. And so they learned how to cut steaks, butcher steaks and stuff. And then when they got backed up, I'd go in there and I'd wash dishes with them, right? It was like a total, classless system, right? And I learned a lot from that about camaraderie. And I see that here at Wabash College. This is one of the reasons that Wabash College really resonates with me. Those of you who are tour guides know that I will interrupt you and when you're walking around with somebody. And I'm likely to say this every time: Wabash, I like the quarterback, but it's an O-lineman school, right? And the quarterback knows that too. Because I don't care who you are, it's how hard do you work, how hard you helping out somebody else. That's what our culture is about here, right? That's what a kitchen culture in the best days is about. It's about me helping my buddies and them helping me and getting through this, basically this war of a busy night, right? I remember one particular night where it was Mother's Day night, actually. And everybody, I mean, like 3 times as many people come to eat there. And it's just like packed. And oh my God, these guys saved my butt right and left. It was incredible, right? And so I was exhausted, and I walked into the wait station, and the manager was there, and the rich waiters were there because they've had a great night. And I'm like, dude, these guys have just, the wheelhouse has just been incredible. What do you say we spring for a shrimp dinner for these guys tonight? And the manager, who I can't use the word on tape, but I thought of him, really nasty guy, goes, no, chicken. And I got really mad. I was mad. Well, I probably had a few also. I went back into the kitchen. I'm going, And I went back into the wait station, and I threw $40 down on the table, and I said, 2 shrimp dinners, please. Thank you. I'm sorry. It was an emotional moment. It wasn't 5 minutes before everybody in that damn restaurant knew what I'd done, right? I'd broken that class struggle, right? That's what we do. We take care of each other, right? We don't make divisions, right? Yeah, that was amazing. I got another story about that manager, too. So this guy, he actually went to Culinary. He went to the Culinary Institute of America, which is like the top cooking school in the country, right? He probably should have been a chef, but he could make more money as a manager. So you can see right away what I think of him. So he's coming in the kitchen one day around 5 o'clock, right? And he's walking back, and we're trying to get ready, and he's talking, and we don't want to hear him. And he's picking, off of the stuff on the line we call mise en place, or setup, right? Little pieces of shrimp and stuff that you're going to put into dishes, right? And at one point, he turns the corner onto the line. So the line is a very different place. You go in my house, I'll show you where it is. It's where the stove is and the table in front of it, right? You don't walk behind the line, even if you own the place, unless you have permission, okay? The dishwashers, we get back there to put the pots away, but it's sacred ground. He's turned the corner. I'm on the end, and I've got some clarified butter, and I accidentally spilled 2 ounces of clarified butter on his Italian suit. And at that point, the kitchen went silent, and everybody's like, "Oh my God!" Everybody knew 2 things, right? A, that was no accident, and B, it's his fault, and even he knew that. So he had left, and then he got out of the kitchen, and the chef goes, "Beer for Warner, stat!" I mean, it was like, yeah, right? So, don't mess with working people, right? Just don't mess with them, right? So I've learned a lot. I also really owe a lot more to these guys, because when we were slow, they would tell me stories about Mexico. And I didn't know anything about Mexico. I had some crappy high school Spanish. But then when I went back to graduate school, I decided to study Mexican history because of the stories that they told me. And now, as you know, I'm a Latin American historian. I have been for a while now. So I owe that to them, too, quite a lot. So there's a gendered aspect in kitchens as well. There was a woman that worked in that restaurant named Rose, and we used to always call her Rose James Dean. And in fact, she made popovers, so we call her Rose James Dean, popover queen. And she was fun, I kind of wanted to date her, but she didn't want to date me, and but we were still pretty good friends. It was before I was married, honestly. But Rose, she was tough. So women in the kitchen, and at least in that period, have to be really, really tough, right? Because it's a sexist environment. You got to be really, really tough, right? And she was definitely tough. She used to call me, actually, she was from New York and I was from Vermont, so she thought I was like, a hick, right? And she was like, "Rick the Hick with a big, big smile." That's what she used to say. And I do have a big smile, so there you go, right? It's a lot of fun. So there's the kitchen for you. There was one I met in cooking school. Really, she could be an old lineman. She's really tough, seriously. And her name was Kathy, and her last name was Hoare, H-O-A-R-E. And you didn't make fun of that around her, or else you were going to live to regret it. But she was from the neighborhood in San Francisco called the Fillmore, which at the time was kind of tough, right? So she was Kathy Hoare from the Fillmore. But she was really, and I learned a lot about not taking any crap from people from her. She was pretty amazing. The last woman I'll talk about is Julia Child, who is a hero for me. I've been to her kitchen 5 times in Washington, D.C. It's in the Smithsonian Institute. I'm a kind of a Julia. You should see the movie if you haven't, right? She went through a lot of stuff. The movie actually is pretty good. Julia and Julia explains about how she couldn't get the time of day out of chefs in France when she was learning, just because she was a woman, right? And she was really tough. She's taller than me. She was like 6'1", very strong chef, and quite, entertaining on television, right? She talked like this, right? So, how much wine do you put in that, Julia? Oh, about 2 gulps. Yeah, she was just like, if you ever Google Dan Aykroyd, Julia Child, if you haven't seen that. Oh my God. Yeah, I can tell Dean Reddy has seen that. It's absolutely hilarious. So, and it captures her really. So, all right. So, learn from your workers. In my graduate school career, I'll talk about workers a little bit more in a broader way. So, when I was a graduate student, the secretary in my office had a bad back, and I learned a lot from her about how she was treated, especially by male faculty, actually. In liberal Santa Cruz even, they were not treating her very well, and I learned a lot about that and how I don't want to be that way when I become a professor, and I became good friends with her. So whenever the reams of paper would come in, I would stock them in the cupboard because she couldn't bend it over and do it. I did this for like several years, just to be nice, right? When I finished my dissertation, she took it home and copy edited it for free. It was like a $500 gift, right? So what goes around comes around, right? You may or may not know, but one of the things I've been doing during COVID is making a lot of ice cream as well as cake muffins. I've actually made over 500 pints of ice cream during COVID. And I give it out. I've never charged any money for it. I give it out, and I like to give it out to administrative assistants especially, and my phone calls get answered. I'll just put it that way. But yeah, no matter wherever you work, don't get high and mighty about what your position is, right? Do not do that. And I think being at Wabash College, I think we're learning that lesson in a lot of good ways. We're all equal here, right? Don't ever forget that, right? So this is hopefully you've taken some liberal arts, types of lessons away from this. I'm going to give you one more that has to do with my last immersion trip. The last time I went to Kenya, and God willing, I'll go in there again in March. Hopefully the virus will behave. But I'm in Kenya, and one of the things that Bill Cook and I, class in 1966, Lambda Chi, and I do is we travel around in slums, basically, and talk about religion, ask people how they think about things. And we're in essentially this shack, right, which is like corrugated metal and everything. And there's 3 or 4 of us in there, 4 or 5 of us in there, and the guy who lives there is there. And he says, I just feel blessed. And I look around at the shack and I go, what the hell? You feel, and that has stuck with me, 5 years later, right? I wish he had more money. I wish he wasn't living in poverty, for sure, right? I'm not going to romanticize that. But you know what? He sees what he has, and he appreciates what he has. And I'm not so sure that that's not a lesson that we couldn't learn a little bit more from. I wish I could take you all there. I'll be able to take, hopefully, 15 of you there. Because that's a lesson I think is worth learning, even greater than what I can teach you from the kitchen. So that's all I got. Bon appetit.
One final announcement for this week. Saturday, the Little Giant soccer team travels to Worcester to take on the Fighting Scots. Now please rise and sing Old Wabash. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. From the hills of Maine to the western plain.